2016 marks the 25th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog, and since I haven't done a countdown yet focused on Sega at all, I figured it fitting to start with Sonic. But instead of just counting down my favorite games in the series, I figured I'd take a look at the classic Sonic games and count down my favorite zones or levels from the original Sonic the Hedgehog games. These are all games that came out prior to the release of Sonic Adventure on the Sega Dreamcast. But without further ado, let's count down my top favorite zones from Sonic the Hedgehog. I have no problem admitting I'm not a big fan of Sonic 3D Blast. The whole isometric view, as well as the concept, never really did anything for me. But I do kind of have a little soft spot for Diamond Dust Zone, mostly because it's a snow-themed level, and I'm always a big fan of those. I like the little snowmen that are all throughout the course of the level, and it has a pretty decent track to go along with the level itself. While I am not going to ever really play Sonic 3D Blast again willingly, I will always remember at least liking Diamond Dust Zone. We all remember Sonic the Hedgehog for Genesis, but there actually was a Sonic the Hedgehog for Sega Master System and Sega Game Gear, and it had differences. Not just, of course, graphically, but had a few different zones, including Bridge Zone, which is easily my favorite. Mostly because I absolutely adore the theme to Bridge Zone itself, but I also like the whole aesthetics, the kind of half-circle bridges, and the boss fight at the end of it. Well, the fight in the Master System version was pretty cool for the time, though the Game Gear version was a little bit more lacking. Just one of those oddities of the Sonic the Hedgehog universe, but I will always love Bridge Zone. Going from one 8-bit Sonic to another, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was also released on Game Gear and Master System, and once again there were some differences, including the inclusion of Aqua Lake Zone. Now, think of Aqua Lake Zone, if you've never played it, as a better version of Labyrinth Zone. Well, at least in my opinion. It had a very similar aesthetic with the whole kind of ruined scenario for a lot of it, and had some maze areas just like Labyrinth Zone did, but overall, I liked Aqua Lake Zone a heck of a lot more than, of course, the dreaded Labyrinth Zone. My favorite Sonic game of all time is Sonic the Hedgehog 2, so there's going to be a few Sonic 2 levels here included, and my first of which is going to be Hilltop Zone. Not only does it have an absolutely rocking song to it, I love the whole gondola scenario of going down these into the caves of the hill itself, and of course being chased by a giant swelling of lava throughout the course of the stage. Well, the Robotnik boss itself really wasn't anything special, it was the journey through Hilltop Zone that has always made me love it. I was one of those unfortunate gamers that didn't get a chance to play Sonic CD back in the day, but once I finally did, the level that really stood out was Stardust Speedway. I love both versions of it, but especially the future version with the instruments that are attached to the various different platforms, and just the whole sense of speed I felt was more so in Stardust Speedway than a lot of the other levels contained within Sonic CD. Whether it's the past or future version, I like both, and Stardust Speedway is definitely my favorite from Sonic CD. After one of my least favorite levels in any Sonic, Metropolis Zone, it's such a relief to make it into Sky Chase. It has a soothing song that just perfectly amplifies the whole cloud and sky scenario, riding along on the red tornado with Tails and taking out a few enemies here and there, collecting a couple of rings, but it's much more of just a relief after surviving the horror that was Metropolis Zone, and why I will always love Sky Chase. I love the original Sonic the Hedgehog, but honestly, a lot of the levels really don't hold up today. But one that does is Marble Zone. I love the whole Roman and Greek ruins aesthetic to it, has one of the best songs from the original Sonic the Hedgehog, and I feel like the level flows a lot better than some of the later Sonic the Hedgehog 1 levels like Spring Yard, and especially the dreaded Labyrinth Zone. Marble Zone was one of the ones that really always stood out in the original Sonic to me, and why I still love it today. One of the coolest things ever with Sonic was the combination of putting Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles together to make one long epic game. One of my favorite levels though from Sonic & Knuckles by far is Sky Sanctuary Zone. Not only does it have the absolutely beautiful atmosphere, I love the cloud effects. Heck, I even like the Eggman-esque robots that are chasing you around and firing lasers. But that song is just so brilliant and beautiful to still listen to today. And then the throwback Metal Sonic fights that you get to have throughout it just makes Sky Sanctuary one of the absolute best stages in all of classic Sonic. While I like Sonic 2 just a little bit more, Sonic 3 is still amazing. And one of the reasons for that is Ice Cap Zone. Not only does it have a brilliant song, but that whole opening of snowboarding, just the graphics blew me away for the time of seeing Sonic on the snowboard before crashing into the mountains itself. It has some really cool platforming mechanics with the swinging amounts of ice, as well as sliding down the mountains itself. Ice Cap Zone still gets me pumped today, and one of the reasons I will still go back and play Sonic 3. Before we get to number 1, let's look at a couple of honorable mentions, and trust me, this list was honestly hard to put together because there's so many great classic Sonic levels, but one that honestly isn't the best but I want to throw on here is Meta Jungle Lyra Zone from Sonic Triple Trouble on the Sega Game Gear. The main reason for it is that it has a pretty nice song and all, and it's an okay jungle level, but just that name, Meta Jungle Lyra Zone, is still one of the coolest names for any of the classic Sonic games. It all has to start somewhere, but two of the best opening levels are of course Green Hill Zone and Emerald Hill Zone from Sonic 1 and 2. Not only do they have beautiful pieces of music that gets you into the whole Sonic feel, but also introduce you to a lot of the classic enemies of Sonic that are still mentioned and memorable today as they were the first ones you got to see. The whole concept of gathering rings as well as going fast are introduced in these stages and why they are still some of the best zones. Absolutely one of the oddest games in the whole Sonic series is Knuckles Chaotix for the 32X, and for good reason. It's not only a weird concept of the two characters chained together, it honestly is just okay at best with some really convoluted levels, but I love Speed Slider. It still stands out as a really cool kind of themed level that has some carnival zone thrown into it, a futuristic looking weird city in the background of certain areas, and honestly one of the funner experiences that is in Knuckles Chaotix. I told you before I love Sonic 2, and Casino Night Zone is one of the key reasons for why. I blame it for the reason why I still love casinos today and got me interested in slot machines. Just that whole mechanic of being able to stop what you're doing, jump into a slot machine, and try to do your best to gather extra rings, hopefully getting an extra life or maybe getting just enough so that you can enter the bonus zone by hitting that next checkpoint. The bumpers and flippers, as well as a pretty interesting boss considering a lot of the Sonic 2 bosses honestly are just okay. Casino Night Zone's boss definitely stood out and gave me a lot of trouble back in the day for whatever reason. Sonic 2 is absolutely my favorite classic Sonic game, my favorite Sonic game period, and Casino Night Zone is definitely my favorite stage. So there you have it, my favorite classic Sonic the Hedgehog zones or levels. Tell me down below, which ones are your personal favorites? Or what is your favorite Sonic game? Or let me know what other Sonic countdowns you're interested in seeing me do in the future. Don't worry, I definitely will be doing a worst classic Sonic Zone countdown in the relatively near future. I love Sonic the Hedgehog, and even though there have been plenty of bad times, I'm looking forward to the upcoming games and definitely will always love the blue blur. But anyway guys, that's going to wrap up this countdown. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course I hope you enjoyed.